Well, hello everybody. It's time for another critique of the week. Thanks so much for joining me. It is Friday, May 17th. Looking forward to looking at some poems today. Let's see, who do we have here? A reminder that the main place for this is at YouTube. We sort of spread it around on Twitter and, X and Facebook. So other people can see it and be introduced to it because it does spread throughout their algorithms. But the main place where the best commentary is YouTube. So if you're watching somewhere else and you can, hop over to the YouTube stream instead, where the chat window is hopping. And who do you have? Monica Dobos is here, Mark Grenier, Hemet Malik, D. Coleman's here, Dick Westheimer, Steve Horrell, got Chelsea McClellan, James Langford's here, Winston Munn, who had some poems critiqued last week, Katie Dozier, sadly back in Texas. We'll be together again soon. Tara Meslick McMahon is here. Let's see, Nate Jacobs here, Sharon Ferrante, Rebecca Kate, Elizabeth Wolf is here. Hey, Elizabeth. Mary Keating. Who else we got? Cindy Guntherman, Morgan Feeney, Leela Holmes. Yeah, great. Lisa Seidenberg is here. Maria L. Berg, good to see you. Jamal Udin, good to see you too. All right. And over on Facebook, a few people watching there. Radoslav Stoyanov, good to see you. Yeah, that's nice. And John Atkinson is here too. I'll try to keep an eye. I'll pop over to Facebook a little bit, but it is hard. There's so much going on in the YouTube chat that it's tough to get back. But anyway, today's one of those no holds barred, lightning fast moves to the oldest submissions in the queue. We're gonna try to get through as many as we can. The mission this time of year. Let me turn this down. A little hot on the mic. This time of year, gosh, that was really hot. I don't know. Oops, I turned it the wrong way. That's why. All right, that's better. So so this time of year, in between, the Chapbook Prize is done, the issues to the printer for the summer. We're sort of promoting the Rattle Poetry Prize. So now this little window is like catch-up window. It's catch-up season on submissions. We got a backlog of them in general poems and things like that. We got a backlog in the critique of the week too. And so let's try to move through as many as we can. The oldest submission in the queue is from October 25th, 2023. So what is that? 8 months ago. And this one is by Sukumar S. from Bangalore. So good to see that. And as always, leave as many comments as you can. I'll pass along as many as we go, and we'll talk about all these poems and try to help the poets as much as possible. That's always the goal, to give that honest feedback that's so valuable. Letting poets know what strangers actually think, what are reactions, what works, what doesn't, is always really helpful. So let's do that. And the first poet, like I said, is Sukumar S. No special question, so let's dive into the poem. And the poem is right here. Eventuality of Chaos. The spincers of fate croon, their wrinkly hands beckon, then cry out with glee, as I dazedly approach the crossing of realms, inebriated on the ecstasy of impending doom. I stagger and stumble into the ruins of my soul. I watch the cascading chaos envelop my surroundings, as bleakness towers over me, reminding me of my companion. Poor helplessness. What can it do? Absolutely nothing, except for watch, as everything around him crumbles, falls to pieces, like glass shattering, heartbreak all over again. A gut-wrenching pain. The light suddenly dims, a sign of abandonment. Apollo has forsaken me again. Anger burns in my veins, the only tether to mortality. A sense of purpose reborn. Revenge. So, there you go. That is the first poem. That is Eventuality of Chaos. And the first thing that stands out, we want some enjambment in our poems. If we don't have to use punctuation at the end of every line, make sure that we don't. Because that enjambment, that sense of movement between... from one line to the next, is a key part of the sound pleasure of a poem, is that tension between that little pause as we shift back to the line and not. And so this poem has a punctuation at the end of every line, which is not something you want to do, because punctuation, there's already a pause there. We want to take advantage and heighten up the music and pay attention to the sounds through the way that we break our lines and move through a poem. And so, a lot of times we talk about plating poems and how it's nice to have a poem that feels like it has a consistent sort of line length and things like that things are carefully considered and done. So right off the bat, if you had a line break like here, for example, because we have these short lines Their spinsters of fate croon, their wrinkly hands beckon, they cry out with glee. Those are all sort of statements. Then we could have, as I dazedly approach, break it there, the closing of realms. And then you have a cleaner poem with some enjambment, so there's a little bit of tension, a little bit more, it's not as expected. And that increases the amount we pay attention to, really. So that's the first thing off the bat. And then as Katie Dozier says, I saw out of the corner of my eye, there's so many red flag words here for melodrama that I have trouble connecting. And that's the thing. So there are a lot of words, what we're trying to do with a poem is convey our emotions, to make people feel the way we feel. And over time, as languages have developed, we have all these words that stand in for emotions, that become, metaphors for emotions, that are adjectives that describe emotions. And the thing is that they're so common, they don't actually make us feel. They're like labels we stack onto things. Like, angry, we could stick an angry label on, if I had a Post-it note, and I stuck angry on my mouse. Does it make my mouse angry? No, there's just the word angry. And that's the kind of way that it feels when we use these sort of melodramatic words. We want to build a sense of drama, not sort of attach labels of melodrama. And so as Morgan Feeney says, avoid adverbs like dazedly, it's weak and not helpful. And that's true too. But so let's point out the words. We want to avoid these words in poems unless there's a really good reason to use them. And usually that good reason would be to shift and change the way that we're using them. Because, if something's not new, if something is something we've heard before, then it's not making new neural connections in our brain. It's not making that sort of, as we're reading these, like our brains are firing up and there's like neurons that are connecting these like constellations of ideas and emotions that they represent. But if it's stuff that we've already seen, they sort of just all light up at once as that general category, and it doesn't make new connections, doesn't make us feel or understand anything in a different way. And so we want to make sure that we are, using those kind of words in unique ways if we're using them at all, and try to avoid using them. It's a good exercise to see, can I convey this emotion without using the word? So let's talk about those words as we go through. So I dazedly, that was already pointed out, I dazedly approached. So you're sort of painting the scene with that adverb. Instead of describing the way the movement would be if it was a dazedly type of movement crossing the realms, right? Inebriated in the ecstasy of impending doom. So the doom and the ecstasy are both two really dramatic statements that contain a lot in meaning, but don't actually get that meaning across on the page. I watched the cascading chaos envelop. So it's, chaos, cascading, like these are all words that are big words signifying a lot, but end up not working. I stagger and stumble onto the ruins of my soul. Another phrase like that. I watch cascading chaos appearing again here, enveloping my surroundings as bleakness towers over me, reminding me of my companion, poor and helpless. Yeah. And so you get the idea. Like all those things, instead of painting a scene, letting us enter a world, and then having the feelings for ourselves, the big difference, we could talk a lot about the concept of method acting. I can't remember what I was listening to. I was listening to an interview with somebody, like an actor the other day, and just talking about what the method acting process is like. And they called it something. I can't remember the name of the coach or whatever, the acting coach that built this school of doing it. But things feel much more authentic when the actor is actually feeling that emotion. And that's what we're doing with poems. We're method writing. That's a class that Jack Grapes gives in LA here, taking that method acting school and taking it into the writing realm. But you want to make the person, because when I read a poem, I'm acting out your voice when I'm reading your poem. I want to enter a space and then react myself and feel the feelings myself. And so instead of having these sort of images like the ruins of my soul and the bleakness towering over me, put me in an actual space. Like tell a story that I can see things where I'm moving through an actual piece of space, and then I feel the bleakness of what's towering over me. Yeah. So anyway, so Elizabeth Wolf says, I think it's the helplessness that had a little personification going on. Dive into that. And yeah, that's a great point. So we haven't gotten to that. It's on our second read yet, but great point here. The next line coming up, reminding me of my companion, poor helplessness. So helplessness is my companion. What would it be like if you were walking, where would we be walking in this? Like we're crossing the realms of chaos, I think it was, right? So where are we? Are we walking through a cave? Are we walking across a bridge? What would it like to be? Are we like fording a river? What would it be like to be walking across these realms from one to the other, where chaos is, And then once poor helplessness is there, that personified emotion, that can become an actual person or like a dog or who knows what. Like what, once you start doing that, poor helplessness is my companion. Start describing what that personified creature would be. And then we can start to build a scene, and then the reader can start to feel what's going on. Yeah. So, and of course, as Cam Cavallo Poetry says, we are seeing these large words rather than concrete images. And what we take concrete images, stuff we can actually see and feel and sort of enter and create a space like we're in a movie or in a 3D virtual reality or whatever, using that mind's eye. And, so we use that to create the space, and then the emotions come off of that as a reaction to it. Aaron Sickler says, walking with my helplessness sounds like a good prompt. Yeah, I agree, it does. Okay, so we have falls to pieces, like glass shattering. So those are, again, these big melodramatic cliches signifying the feeling, whereas the goal, like we want to do storytelling. We want to tell stories, create a space that we can enter as a reader and feel these feelings, not be told about them. So it's, again, at the end of the day, it's a show, don't tell type poem. So we want to show more and don't try to tell us how to feel. Okay, let's read the next one and just see if we can find another entry point for this one. Like we had the helplessness, the companion as a personified helplessness. Let's see if we can find another place in this one to enter into the poem and make it a magical poetry space. So here, Strip Bare. This is poem number 2 from what was it again? Yeah, Sukumar. Strip Bare. I took a step into the freezing night, armed with only the barest of minimums. Discarded layers, leaving but only a single. And as I inhaled the cold, biting air, what chilled me to the core was not the icy winds, but the piercing gaze of strangers, looks of judgment, looks of mockery, looks of pity. I suddenly become conscious of the rolls that adorn my flesh, the protrusion of my stomach, the extra fat around my thighs, the enormity of my waist, the stripes that line my shoulder. Progress, they say. My armor of comfort come undone, the straps of protection no longer reach. I tug down my shirt, preventing the sight of nakedness, the sight of vulnerability, to prevent the fate that myself of the past suffered. A subject of ridicule, of contempt, a prisoner with unseen scars, a subject of torture. A flashback ceased as I walked back to the thinnest of coverings, and I came back with the thickest feeling of heaviness. An anchor of shame and guilt dropped into the sand of dysmorphia. So this one is a lot better in that it creates a scene. Do you feel the difference between these two poems, Sukumar? Where in the first one we had these abstract things. Here we actually get the sense of, as Deb T says, my interest picks up with a specific description of the body. And once we start to get that, and we start to see the crowd around us, that piercing gaze of strangers, but what they're actually doing, those looks of judgment, the mockery of pity, we can start to see, the protrusion of my stomach, the extra fat around my thighs. We're looking at that with all the strangers looking around. So we have the scene being built. And that's where the poem starts to come to life. So so that's the place, that's the place where the poem sort of is living. And so how can you describe that in more detail, in more concrete detail, to make that scene even stronger, so we feel that feeling of being judged? And that's really what how a poem operates. So, there's some amount of cliches in here, the piercing gaze of strangers, things like that, the, icy winds chilled me to the core. I mean, those things don't really add anything to help. But when we jump in into the descriptions, those are the things. So show us what the strangers look like. Show us that. What are the looks in their faces? What's the lighting like? Where are we? So we can build up that scene even more. Then the poem would be even more strong. So Winston Munson started much better, but needs to continue with details that build up the abstracts. Exactly. So that's the thing. So more of that is the direction to go with this poem. Okay, well, we're going to move on to the next poem. Thanks for sharing that. Again, that was Sukumar sharing that poem. And next, let's go to, well, not like I'm just going in order, obviously. The next poem in line is, let's see. This is by God's Gift Isaiah from Nigeria, I believe. Orolope Estate, I believe in Nigeria. Submittable doesn't do a great job of showing your countries. But anyway, this is The Lie I Told My Body. And let's see where we go with this. And of course, as always, this is sort of what it feels like. So these quick rounds through poems are like what it's like reading submissions. And that's kind of the goal or the point, the impetus for Critique of the Week about 6 years ago was to let people feel what it's like to read submissions and see what's there and get feedback on them in real time. And so that's what we're doing here. So again, this poet is God's Gift Isaiah. And here we go. The Lie I Told My Body. What would you do when you realize that your entire life is a lie and you have been living in the lie you told yourself? So that's a question that starts the poem out. And here we go. Can make it a little bigger. The font's a little small on this one. Here. Okay. A question for your thoughts, a question I have answers for. Question, what is love? My first answer, love is stupid. I was only just 8 months enjoying my first life in my first home I called womb. And there I was, with my ears filled with fairy tales about a being who gave his life for an unloving people. There and then my body believed one thing, love is stupid. A question for your thoughts, a question I have answers for. Question, what is love? My second answer, love is weak. I was only just 5 years old when my ears filled again. When someone slaps you on your right cheek, make sure to turn the left. Those words sounded unbelievable, like expecting my little sister to keep her snitchy mouth shut after pulling her tiny ears because she tore my note. If my little sister couldn't turn a blind eye then, why would I turn my 2 cheeks over the pain of slaps? I was pretty sure my weak dear Sunday school teacher couldn't fight, but I could. My tiny hands and mouth were created to inflict pain on any David who dared my Goliath. There and then my soul believed one thing, love is weak. In my nature, baby self made a promise to Mother Earth, Eru pi ni mi bi iru pi ni mo ma para della subgan mio ni guba, ifalaya lita ba aya mije. I promised, and sorry if I was not pronouncing that right, I'll do my best. I promised my Mother Earth once more, I am sand as sand will return home, but I will never allow love to destroy my life. I promise I broke before making it. A question for your thoughts, a question I have answers for. Question, what is love? My third answer, love is a being, unseen, popular, and very controversial one. I was only just 16 years old, or years by the time my ears had been filled many times that its drums no longer beat. My mouth finally opened of its accord, calling out the being to save me from the bin. In just 16 years of fighting, I lost all battles and won no conquest. I was conquered. My hands and mouth had failed and to shield me from David's sling. My Goliath is on the threshing floor, begging not to be thrashed. There and then, my spirit betrayed me by calling her lover. Mother Earth mocked me. Foolish girl, you cannot run from your betrothed. There and then, my body, soul, and spirit succumbed to one thing true. Love is an unseen being that came to die in a body to save a weak me, and I broke free from the lies I made my body believe. So that's this poem. Yeah. So Terra Magic Man says, are questions and poems, Tim, what are your thoughts? I think, questions, you can go sort of too far with questions, where the whole poem ends up being sort of these questions, and it's sort of easy to have a sort of a deep, a sort of faux depth based on having questions, because questions do have a lot more ambiguity and nuance in the answers, and so you're sort of implying this but not having to say it. So there's a way that questions can kind of pile up a little bit, but at the same time, it's really important to shift around syntax and change the way we're structuring our sentences, so we're not sort of saying the same sentences and the same patterns over and over again. And a question can really break it because you flip the verb and object and things like that. So there's a way to break the flow and change the feel and the music of a poem really well with a question too, and that opens up and expands and shifts. If you're having trouble finding the sense of movement within a poem, A question is a great way to do that, to go someplace else. It's a good sort of way to take a side path and find something new in it. So I think that works. For here, I didn't mind it at first, although it sort of feels like spinning its gears in this poem, the way that it starts out. And I was going to say, a question for your thoughts, a question I have answers for, question, what is love? My first answer, love is stupid. I think I would cut this whole thing. I think especially the way that it repeats, it's such a sort of wheel spinning moment where the poem's not actually going anywhere. If we jump right in, I was only 8 months enjoying my first life and my first home called womb. That sets us right in the scene, and that works a lot better than sort of spinning our wheels with this sort of artificial construct of the questions, especially the way they're repeating. Another thing too, Ruth Kennedy says it's a long poem, and I feel like I lost my way. The questions didn't reflect evolution in the poem for me. Mary Lisa says Stephen Dunn said, "Never ask a question in a poem that you don't have an answer to." I think that's something. Isn't that the advice for a lawyer on trial? Never ask a witness a question that you don't know the answer. I'm not sure. That's interesting. I don't think I agree with Stephen Dunn, but he is Stephen Dunn, so. So as Aaron Sickler says, the title sets up an expectation of a lie being revealed, maybe the lie of love or an idealistic form of love, and that would be compelling done in a serial way, a bunch of scenes undoing. Chelsea McClellan says, I like the idea of the structure. For me, the age differences do enough and don't need the first bit. And it's, so that is, so I was 8 months old, and then I was 5 years, exactly. So we don't need this in the poem. I totally agree with that. The thing, you never want someone while they're reading your poem to know what the next line is going to be. We talked just in the last poem about the importance of line breaks, and having sort of some surprise. And, that's why that you shouldn't end with punctuation every time. You should have some enjambment, usually. I mean, there's exceptions to everything. But that helps have a sense of, I don't know what's coming next. And the problem with repeating 4 lines like this in the same format is we know exactly what's coming. And then it takes us out of the poem. We stop being engaged with it on that level of actually paying deep attention, which is what you want someone to do when they're deep reading. So once the question, once I have a question for your thoughts, a question I have for answers, I know exactly what you're going to say. And I sort of tune out that sense of paying focus. You never want repetition to be something that's not surprising. And I think the poem, so that's another reason I would cut this out. Other things that apply to this poem are the same things we were talking about in the last poem. The poem comes to life in places where, like I had my first home I called womb, that idea of the womb, but then we get the abstraction in the melodrama in other sections. I think soul came up again in this poem, and those are the kind of things, the same thing we were talking about before, where show don't tell, where we can't tell people how to feel. We have to make them feel by creating this world of the poem. So a lot of the same things apply as the last critique. So make sure you watched the last poems we looked at, because a lot of the same stuff applies here. Let's see. Yeah. Sandra Fee says that if you ask a question like "What is love?" the answer should be really intriguing or surprising. And Cam Carvalho Poetry says this kind of poem is one that needs some kind of volta, and that's the thing. Yeah, exactly. And a volta is a word for like a shift, a transition, a kind of, a sense of movement. A story has an arc. It has like a build up, the climax, the conclusion, in that sort of arc pattern. A poem has to have that too, and it's shown most clearly in a sonnet with that structure that we have, where we have that volta coming in around line 7 or 8 or wherever. Where the poem turns and the attention turns, and then we see between the contrasts of the two and the way we shift, we come to some new understanding. And so, and the poem doesn't really have that shift, which is set up, as somebody pointed out, with the lie I told my body, some kind of reveal about what the lie was. And we never really got that, so there's no sense of movement in the poem. Winston Munn says, doesn't every poem need a turn, no matter how small? Yeah, I think so. Like in the same way, I think I argue with some people about this in the haiku community, but I say a haiku is 2 worlds in one breath. And there's some sort of attempts at having, arguing that there can be a 1-image haiku. But to me, I think those are just sort of tricks where you're looking at one object from 2 different directions, and there's still a sense of two-ness. If you start in the same place you end on, then nothing actually happens. Like a poem is a magic spell that transforms our experience, our understanding, and our emotional state. And if it doesn't move, it doesn't end up in a different place than it was going to start with, then it can't be transformative. And so it does need some kind of sense of movement. They don't have to be a sharp turn, a sudden jolt. They can be a sort of gradual, where you slowly understand. But something has to change and shift. The speaker has to be a little different at the end of the poem than the beginning, or else the poem doesn't have any sort of sense of purpose. And so that's a kind of way to think. Like, how is the speaker of the poem different at the end than they were when they started out? And to me, this poem lacks that sense of movement. So what is it that we learned in the process of making this poem? Not that we knew ahead of time, but that we learned while we were writing. And I think that's what we need in this kind of poem. Well, in all poems, really. Let me see if there's any other comments before we move on. Yeah, so Audrey Friedman says need to start with a gripping image. And yeah, I mean, where the images are, you can feel as you're reading the poem that you're much more engaged with it. Okay, so yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. I think we sort of covered enough, given the first three poems we looked at, that we sort of look at the other stuff from the last poem too and apply that to your poem as well. Okay. So, let's go on to the next poet, and we'll go label this so I know I looked at it already. And next in line is Sharua Pathanya. This poem's called Raise the Bar High, No General Questions. I'll show you this if anyone wants to follow her on Twitter. Say hello. Or X, now I should say. I woke up this morning and there's no more twitter.com. It is just X. But there's the Twitter handle if anybody wants to follow. Let's take a look at this poem. This is, I'll zoom in a little bit on this one too. Raise the Bar High. TW Alcoholism. I'm not sure what the TW stands for, but maybe we'll figure it out. So here is the poem. And this is Sharuya Pathanya from Hamirpur, I think in India. Raise the Bar High. And with that subtitle, I'm curious about this poem. We'll see what it does. Ash of cigarettes imprinted at my PJs. It's 11:15 and I still feel a little young for the night, enough alive for a pint of beer or a whiskey. Every man's left the place to lie with their beloved wives or to visit the dead lovers by the roadside. Some saunter toward motel rooms, masculine doorknobs awaiting their rusted keys. The bartender crosses her arms at my face. She despises my presence, even though I tip her heavily. She wants to get done. She has a family to serve, feed, and take care of, and I shall not answer this, not to you when I'm drunk, not when I feel young. I don't want to sound dumb. I just need some hip music, or country, or any remedy for the silence. I'll break some glass. I'll cause a traffic riot, a road rage at the third block right by the street, or maybe, can I have a whiskey, please? Don't you close at 11:30? It's 11:23 by my watch. It was summer in the morning. It rained in the evening. Now it's cold in the night, but my clothes are woolen and warm. I'm burning with ecstasy in this empty bar. It's a dark sky outside, and even I, if I plan to, die tonight, devoid of light, I'll be alive, all right and fine by morning. So, as Jamie Thomas says, strong opening. Trigger warning is a content warning. Yeah, thanks so much. So I disagree with trigger warning so strongly that I don't even know what TW means. But if you don't want trigger warnings, don't read poems, I guess. So that's a trigger warning for alcoholism. Okay. So raise the bar high. Ash of cigarettes imprinted in my PJs. So great, as someone said. Leila Holmes says, I really enjoy a lot of that. Yeah, and you see the difference between the first three poems and this one. How the vivid images, that's enough to carry our attention. That's really what it takes to have that, because we're such visual creatures. That's why we evolved. We're hunter-gatherers, and we had to look for berries and avoid snakes. And, duck when eagles flew by. That was our existence, and figure out how to use tools and things. But so much of it was visual, and we're really visual based in our minds. And so having strong images that paint a scene are enough to carry you through so much of a poem, or really anything. And so that aspect, that difference between this poem, the ash of cigarettes imprinted on my PJs, that first line is so vivid that we're already on board with the poem, and we're willing to pay attention for so much longer because of that. So that's a great example of how well imagery works. Great setting the scene, as Colin Sandberg says. And my critic says scary poem, but a little too long. I think I really agree with that summary. Mishra says, I think TW was not intended to be a warning, but a part of the poem. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. That could be. Yeah, so Jamie Thomas says that legs a little midway through. A good trim would help a lot. Winston Munn says, I like masculine doorknob, although I don't really understand the meaning. Adrian Friedman says the title tells too much. That's interesting. We'll take a look at that too. But let's look a little more detail in the poem now that we've talked about it generally. I mean, you see too, there was a sense of movement in the poem, like something happened, and that's what we were talking about before too, where there has to be some kind of turn, some kind of sense of movement. The speaker was different at the end than the beginning, even though they're sort of stuck in the same rut. They're in a different place within that rut. Yeah. Okay, so ash of cigarettes imprinted at my PJs. It's 11:15, and I still feel a little young for the night. See, I'm feeling a little young for the night. Really great opening. I feel a little young for the night. That's a really great way to put it. Enough alive for a pint of beer or a whiskey. So that's great. Every man's left the place. Yeah, Elizabeth Wolf says, and I was going to point this out too, great images, but I'm a little confused why she's in her PJs at the bar. Yeah. So if you're... Yeah, I was wondering about that too. And I wonder if I just didn't understand that as a reference to something different. So if... I mean, it would be... So it's one of those things, if you do something unusual, if you're going to a bar in PJs, you have to make a point of it. If you're starting to wear PJs at the beginning, like pajamas, if that's what the PJ means, then you have to mention that you changed, so we're not imagining you in PJs. So there is something there we have to figure out what the point of that is. It seems like a little distraction. In my interpretation, it was like I was, smoking out, going to bed, and then I thought, I'll go out to the bar. And that was so I thought there was a change of clothes in there, was my interpretation. But, yeah, so Sandra Fee says, I think in PJs at home and then having enough energy to go out to the bar. That was my interpretation too, but he kind of left it in the pajamas. Although PMB says pajamas at the bar is a pro move. Yeah, I have a nephew who refuses to wear anything but pajamas. So I guess that could be a possibility too. Anyway, every man's left the place to lie with their beloved wives or to visit dead lovers by the roadside. Some saunter. So someone said, they would prefer some specific descriptions of the men, but I sort of like the generalization here because we have some detail. Some lie with their lovers, some visit their dead lovers by the roadside, some saunter toward motel rooms, masculine doorknobs awaiting their rusted keys. And the masculine doorknobs of the hotel rooms, and then the rusty keys. I think that's a really nice detail too. Really, that's the sign of the great details in the poem. Colin Sandberg says, I think the PJs is a sign of how far they are in their alcoholism. And if that's the case, I think we have to acknowledge that we're still in it. It shouldn't be something that we're even talking about. If we're talking about it, it could be a really interesting detail that we expand on in the poem, like describe me at the bar in my pajamas. But so Sharon Fronti says, I'm retired. Pajamas are a must. Yeah. So I think it needs to be addressed later if we're still in the pajamas at the bar. And if we change clothes, we should address it too. We're telling a story, and that's sort of like a Chekhov's gun, that, if there's a shotgun that's described at the beginning of the story, it has to be used by the end, or else it's just a pointless distraction. And I think that's what the PJs are right now. They're Chekhov's gun in the poem, and we shouldn't be talking about it. It could be a cool detail to add to the poem if we change out of them, or if we wear them to the bar, because that's how far gone we are. Yeah, so as Mary Keating says, the PJs show that the speaker is the alcoholic, so desperate for a drink, it doesn't even get dressed. So if that's the case too, it should be brought up again. Anyway, the bartender crosses her arms at my face. She despises my presence. Even though I tip her heavily, she wants to get it done. She has a family to serve, feed and take care of, and I shall not answer this. So this is the part to me where the poem slowed down. The rusted keys was so good, but the bartender scene, there's a little bit too much explication of what's happening, with this sort of interaction. And I think, if she's just crossing her arms, even though I tip her heavily, like that's enough of the bartender. I don't think we need that much. It goes on too long in this little scene. And it also has the "I shall not answer this," which seems a little stilted. Like, nobody really uses "I shall not." As Sharon, Sandra Fees was just saying, the opening gets my attention up until the "I shall not" line. That phrasing seems so off register, dated, or out of sync with this poem. Exactly what I was about to say. Yeah. So, okay. Anyway, yeah, so I shall not. So this is like too, it loses the energy of the poem. You can kind of feel that. Like a few people said it was getting slow in the middle, and that's just the middle where it's getting slow. I just need some hip music or country or any remedy for the silence. The remedy for silence is nice. I'll break some glass. I'll cause a traffic riot. And then here we get into detail again, and the poem gets a little more interesting. So if we just, if we jumped right through and gotten rid of, just the bartender, we can describe the bartender in one line and then jump to "I just need some music," and then that, I think the poem picks up its energy again. Can I have some whiskey, please? Don't you close at 11:30? It's 11:23 by my watch. And then, so this part too, there's a rule of fiction that Janet Fitch taught me when I was in her fiction class. She talked a lot about how you should only use dialogue if it's going to reveal character, and if it's something that doesn't reveal any part of the character, in their manner of speaking, or their word choice, things like that, then there's no reason for the dialogue, and it should just be described. So here, I asked for a whiskey and check my watch. It's only 11:23. They close at 11:30. Not bringing that out into dialogue lets the poem feel a lot faster. So just summarizing that really quickly, if it's an important detail, and move that through that way, I think works better. Yeah. And it was summer in the morning. It rained in the evening. I like this line. So you get back to really describing the scene again in a where the music comes out. So this is the poem's picking up again. It was summer in the morning, it rained in the evening. Now it's cold in the night, but my clothes are woolen and warm. I'm burning with ecstasy in this empty bar. It's a dark sky outside, and even if I plan to die tonight, devoid of light, I'll be alive, all right and fine by morning. And there's a really nice ending there. In the even if I die, I'll be alive is a really interesting way to end the poem. So I like this part a lot too. Yeah, so Elizabeth Wolfe says with the bartender part, I think what the bartender bit was trying to say or show was the speaker is not meeting expectations. I think the poem really lags at that section, and so it needs to come out in vividly, more vividly than that. Leila Holmes says the dialogue could be a good opportunity to feel the drunken slur in the words. That's a good point too. But so this is one of those poems where I think it's really close, just has a lot of clutter in this middle section. Really, if we clean up and sort of cut, in half, from there to there, and we make it like shorter and just move faster, I think the poem works a lot better. As Colin Cyrus says, really makes vivid the denial. And I agree. I think it's a really nice poem, and raise the bar high. As someone said, I missed it, who it was, but someone said, someone said that they feel differently about the title at the end, at the beginning, than they do at the end. And I think it's a great, if you feel that way about the title in a poem after you're reading it, that's a good sign that the poem actually worked and did something. Morgan Phoenix says the ending is cool, but doesn't feel like enough of a turn for me. And Cynthia Guntherman agrees with that. It sort of depends. I mean, in a shorter poem, there's sort of space for less of a turn, I think. PMB says, when the bartender knows your name and scolds you for wearing bedroom slippers. That's nice. Yeah. Aaron Sickler says the tone shift at the end doesn't quite work for me, although some of the phrases are compelling. And yeah, so how do we how do we get to the end? I really like the ending. The ending is surprising and interesting. Is there another poem here too? Oh, there's another poem here too. Okay, I didn't notice. So, yeah. So the question is, how do we get from here, really from the rusted keys, to that shift, where we're sort of zoomed back, which I liked. I think the poem works as far as the movement goes. So it's really a matter of navigating from the keys through the bar scene to here in a way that doesn't lose our attention. Bishwajit says, I think the line that talks about the time shows the degree of alcoholism. Yeah, that's a good point. Dipti says, I feel like something else could happen between the beginning and the end. Yeah. And One Cloud, Marty says, I like a lot of the verse, but don't care about the story. Yeah, if we get to know a little bit about the speaker more, then we get to have more of a connection to the speaker. Aaron Sigler says maybe put the dialogue questions with the bartender. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe to get more feeling and more sense of the character, if we focused on that middle and making that dialogue have more of a sense of revealing who the character is, then we'll feel more for the character. Nancy Sabatic says that the tone shifts from belligerent to euphoric, which can happen during a drink. Yeah, that's a good point. And Tara McMahon says, if you make questions of the theories of where the men go, then leap, then go to the end, it may work better for me. It's one of those ones that, I don't know, just playing with the length and what you can cut really can, because I think the beginning really works and the end really works. And so if we find a bridge between the two, I think the poem can really work. So I think it's all a matter of that. Anyway, let's move on to the other poem. Really, we'll try to be quicker with this one because I want to get through more poets too. This is In Harsh Winter. Let me make sure we can fit it on the page. Let's see. There we go. Okay, In Harsh Winter. And so here we have a prose poem shape with the line breaks added, which is an interesting style. I've never really figured out what the purpose of that is, or how it functions. And it's something you don't see a lot, so I haven't thought about it a lot. But it's an interesting choice. We'll see how that works. I should say too, if you're enjoying this critique and having fun, please do click the like button, because there's 3 times as many people watching than likes. So that's always nice. If you click the like button, helps poetry spread around. Let's see. And if I say that, then it does. It actually works. So I have to do the reminder. Okay. So let's go to this poem. In Harsh Winters, and interesting too with the ambiguous plural there. In Harsh Winters. Some sun is fine to survive. Nothing else would elevate me except your hands on my head and my hair. While you smile, I'll wait. I can't wait until you come back home. I know, you might not, but I've still got time. I imagine you as my pillows, bed sheets, blanket, its covers, sometimes curtains too, so I feel protected from the cold outside world. I'll leave this whole world, the love it offers, the peace it provides, the pleasure it celebrates, everything of it, for your sight, or even a little glimpse. I'll exchange all this to place my face in your soft, moisturized palms and open green fields, flies climbing over our arms, rubbing their hands at every step, bees sucking honey right through our fingers, and colorful flowers I'll hold your hand, cup our shared sweat. I won't let it dry. I'll laugh, I'll cry, I'll love if you'll come back. I'll live if only you'll let me breathe you. Otherwise, some sun is fine to survive. See, Colin Cedric says, reminds me of Ocean Vuong's 7 Circles of Earth. That's interesting. Let's see. Another question for Tim from Tara. On prose poems, do you think they should be right justified? Is that good, best, important? I do. To me, how the difference between poetry and prose in our style guide for Rattle is that prose is justified, and then I enforce sort of the rules for the style guide, which is mostly Chicago. We shift to AP sometimes for a few things that I disagree with Chicago about. But if it's prose, it's sort of like, in a way, it's more free for me to edit. And one of those edits is justified, because if it's a prose poem, that's what it is. That's what I think. Um, but that's just my opinion on what we do. And some people like their prose poems not to be, but I like the fact that it's different from like a James Tate poem with a really long line, which still has a meaning and a purpose to the line break. So it sort of depends. And so what'll happen is if it was a poem like this that was submitted to Rattle, I'll put it justified, send it to the poet that way, and then if they complain about it and talk about it, I can say that it's not. Yeah, justified right. That's what I mean, on the right margin. But anyway, so that's the pace of that. So this is an interesting idea. So Sidney Guntherman says, if I saw this like it is, I would not read it. It hurts my eyes. Make it bigger and put in line breaks. It would go all the way across the page. To me, I kind of actually like the reading experience of this format, which I think is the first time I've come across it where it sort of worked to have these slashes. So there's a sort of listing feel, like we're going through a list. But if you read a list kind of poem where it's just a list, it gets sort of stale and boring. I think the mashup between the two, between the prose poem and the list poem, with the I'm talking like syntactically, it's like a list as far as the syntax goes, where we're just adding on and adding on. If you were listing that as line breaks, it ends up feeling a little stale. But it speeds up the pace to put it in a prose poem with the slashes. So I actually kind of like this for this poem, which is sort of unusual. I've never come across a poem like this that I actually think it worked really well, but I think it does. We've published a few. There's one, I'm trying to think, it was what the Russian doll, the word for it though. What's the word in Russian for the Russian dolls? Mik. I'm never going to be able to remember it. Anyway, we did a poem like this, and it had the same kind of effect now that I think about it, which is to sort of speed up. It sort of gets best of both worlds in a way. You have this sort of velocity that you get with longer lines, but then you also have this sense that it's being broken up too. Yeah, so as Sandra Fees, the rhythm of the poem is what carries it. Yeah. Mark Grenier, though, says this reads like a maundering drunk rambling on. Yeah. And as Sandra Fees says, the rhythm of this poem is what carries it. And I think the rhythm, the slashes, the style helps the rhythm, actually. But let's look at the actual poem. So in Harsh Winters, I don't quite remember what that was about. So I'm not really sure. Some sun is fine to survive. Nothing else would elevate me except your hands. I like that, nothing else would elevate me except your hands on my head and my hair. Do you see how there's like that, when I talk about it being like a listing structure, it's that the next line item in the list modifies the image that we were looking at in a way that's really nicely done and interesting. So, except your hands on my head and my hair while you smile, I'll wait. I can wait until you come back home. I know. I think at this point in the poem, until you come back home, and then I know. I'm a little like craving real details. Yeah, thank you. So Cam says it's Matryoshka, and that is the title of the poem I was thinking of, and I believe it's written like that. Maybe not. Let me see. See if I can find that. I'm just kind of curious. Or that might have been one of the ones. Maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking of a different word. But anyway, let's continue. So I'm desiring more images and details at this point in the poem. I want to know who the you is, and I want to start to feel a sense of imagery coming in where I know where I am. The rhythm carried me for a while, but I need a little more. So I know you might not, but I've still got time. I imagine you, and then here we do get some. I imagine you as my pillows, bed sheets, blanket, its covers, sometimes curtains too. And so I think I think we can cut some of this. I don't think it really adds a whole lot after the back home. But I imagine you as my pillows, bed sheets, blanket, its covers, sometimes curtains too. So I feel protected from the cold, from outside world. I'll leave this whole world, the love it offers, the peace it provides. And again, on this spot, I'm getting a little tired of generalities and ambiguity too. The pleasure it celebrates, everything of it, for your sight, or even a little glimpse. I'll exchange all this to place my face in your soft, moisturized palms. I think the moisturized palms, that the diction of this feels a little out of place. It's like it's sort of a big word. It doesn't feel like that's what the speaker would say. Moisturized palms. It's a way of putting that. I think soft or something, or moist would be better. Let's see. An open green fields. Open green fields a bit cliche. Flies climbing all over the arms, rubbing their hands. So we get nice little images here. At every step, bees sucking honey right through our fingers, and colorful flowers. I'll hold you, your hand, cup our shared sweat. I won't let it dry. I'll laugh, I'll cry. I'll love if you'll come back. I'll love if only you'll let me breathe you, otherwise some sun is fine to survive. I don't know. Again, I think that's nice. So I think that there's just a little bit of places within the poem where it gets a little vague and it goes on too far without any real tangible thing to connect with. I think it's one of those ones where like cutting up, just cutting out some will add a lot to the poem. I think it kind of works. And as Mary Keating says, winter is an analogy for loss. And that little bit of sun too, how valuable that little bit of sun is. On a cold, day, and how much that can change a sort of dreary, harsh winter day. I think it's a nice metaphor for what's being discussed in the poem. So I think this poem works pretty well too. So both of these are just a little bit of trim back kind of jobs. I mean, if we weren't trying to go as fast as possible to the poems, I'd actually cut and trim back. But I sort of highlighted the two spots where it gets a little slow. That's what I would be cutting back. And just getting to the, you always want to stay stimulating. And so when the poem gets a little bit dull like that, cut that stuff out. But that's about it. I think this poem works otherwise for me. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Let's go on to another poem. We have a little bit of time left. And then one thing that was Sharia Pathanya with that poem. I want to get through at least 5 when we do these faster ones. We're only on 3. Can I do 2 in like 10 minutes? Let's see. As Mary Keating said, both those poems are almost there with a few tweaks. And yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's just a matter of cutting out, recognizing what's dull and not as engaging, and then cutting out those parts so the poem can be as strong as possible. But as Leila Holmes says, I like this poet's voice. I do too. Yeah. Okay. Let's go next to Ryan Irvine, and from Canada, I believe. Or is that England? I have to that's Great Britain, I think. Ben Fleet. I have to guess based on the city, which country these people are in. So I think this is England, or Great Britain anyway. 2 poems here, no special questions, from Ryan Irvine. So here we go. Harvestman. Again, let me zoom in a little more. Harvestman. Okay, Harvestman. I sing like a bastard and kick like a mule. I only play poker by non-standard rules. Isn't that, that's like a, is that a cliche or an idiom or a line from a well-known poem? Sing like a bastard, kick like a mule. That sounds very familiar. Well, Google's not. Oh, he kicked like a mule, bit like a crocodile, from Boy Named Sue. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Okay. Anyway, Harvestman. I sing like a bastard and kick like a mule. I only play poker by non-standard rules. Don't call too early or I'll look like a fool on the day when the harvestman comes. I mean, this sounds like a Johnny Cash song too. The whole thing seems very familiar. Maybe somebody knows if this is... Yeah, so Kid Darsh is really close to a Boy Named Sue lyrics, yeah. So I call a number, please bring me my wine. I'll soon send for lovers all in a line. They stop and ask me if I've got the time on the day when the harvestman comes. So similar to like when the man comes around. Roll the dice on my tombstone. 'cause I'll never lose, and pickle your liver with gin if you choose. You bring the rhythm, and I'll sing the blues on the day when the harvestman comes. Yeah, there's a nice refrain to it. The light was much dimmer when I was still young, a glance to the left and a slip of my tongue. Now I'm falling blind, and with a nose full of dung on the day when the harvestman comes. Remember the day when we broke the shapes? We laugh and recall when we play back the tapes. So make all your jokes, there'll be no escapes on the day when the harvestman comes. Eat, drink, be merry, ye scholars and thieves. Give us your hands as we stand in the eaves. They may turn the lights out, but no one else leaves on the day when the harvestman comes. Yeah, so it really does sound like song lyrics, and there are a lot of there's the Eagles lyrics too, Katie says. Yeah, so this feels derivative. I like the rhythm of it, but it feels like it's sort of like a mashup of a lot of songs that already exist, which is interesting. It's something we've never come across, really. But everything sounds so familiar. It feels, I don't want to say like, ChatGPT wrote it, but that's the kind of thing that ChatGPT does, is, take lines and just twist them around a little bit, like something as if that's not, derivative. And I think, and that's how it feels to me, although it's not that, I think, because it can't, the ChatGPT module doesn't understand sonics. There's no external idea of what sound actually works. And so it screws up meter and stuff in an ugly way. And this is nicely done. Monica Doba says a Cento song. Katie George says fair use doesn't include song lyrics. And it does. I mean, fair use is a general policy. I mean, it's a law. It has to be, transformative. There's 5-factor test for fair use. If it's not, but this, I don't know, to me, it doesn't feel original enough. And I think that, I'm not extremely into, music. There's tons of lines of music I'd miss. So I think there are probably other references that I don't recognize. So to me, I don't know. I'm sort of struggling what to say with this poem, because it does feel, almost like, but they're twisted though. The lyrics aren't exactly the same either. So like a Cento, but they're not actually. Yeah. BMB says only play poker by dead man's rules. Yeah, I'm not sure what to say. It feels unoriginal. There's not a real sense of story to it. As somebody else said, I think it was Mark Grenier, song structure works, but it doesn't really go anywhere. It needs more story, a beginning, a middle, and end. And for this kind of poem, I think it does. Leela Holmes says, I vibe with the rhythm, but I want more content. And that's how I feel too. So these are good examples of how I feel as well. I don't get a sense of who the harvestman, I guess the harvestman is a kind of, in the same way, when the man comes around, that song. Yeah, so Katie says it feels like that plagiarism typeword is intentionally rewording the source material, to be frank. And it does too. I don't know what else to say about it. It feels unoriginal to me. Even though it's nice, the meter and the music is nicely done. And in a Cento, even, like having the sources identified. One thing about what Katie mentioned. So she means it's not fair use in the way used here. You have to make the sources known. It has to be, in a Cento, you list the poets you're taking lines from, and that's one of the reasons why it's okay. It has to be, you can look up the 5 factors for fair use. It has to be, transformative to make something new that's actually copyrightable. It has to not infringe on the earning power of the original copyrighted work. It has to, so things like that. And so if we know, and there's exceptions for reviews and parody and all sorts of things because they fit those 5 factors. But this, it just doesn't feel, original to me. As Bishop says, harvest is probably the judgment day. Yeah, be transparent is a good way to put it. It should be clear that that's what you're doing. If you're collaging and building a found poem out of something or a cento. Okay, so let me see. Is there another one? I'm kind of curious if it's the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so the next one's Spiders Under Glass. Spiders Under Glass. Let's see what this is. Spiders Under Glass. His neck muscles pulse like pistons. He puts a contrite face over his cowed anger. You are supposed to be here at 4, David, she says. It's now 7. Daniel's bedtime is an hour, and all he's had is a slice of toast. Her nails scrape nervous lines across her forearm, a plug for the faucet of frustration and empathy. I was held up. I couldn't help it, he mutters, unable to meet the red lights of her gaze. Yeah, Monica Doba says, is this the same author? And, I don't know. See, I have this weird feeling. I have this, given how derivative the first poem felt, I don't trust originality in this either, which is a weird way. And it's a long poem. I think we're just going to skip this poem. And I'm just going to leave it up in the air, and we will move on to the next. Let's move on to the next poet. And this is let's see. The next one up was Partha Sarkar, and Partha has had so many in the critique of the week that we're going to skip that one too. I do try to ask people to like once a year do this. And Partha, I should probably just, write a mass sort of completed or declined letter for that, because there's a ton of submissions from Partha. Let's go next. The Ken Hines is next with Snapshot and Carrion. And we'll close it up with this. I know it's past the hour mark, but let's close up with this. Yeah. So this is the poet taking a snapshot of his pregnant wife. And this is Ken Hines from Richmond, Virginia. So let's take a look at this. So zoom in a little bigger. The poet taking a snapshot of his pregnant wife. You can see her shading, her eyes shrinking from this 35mm intrusion on her rapidly changing shape. So obvious now in the Empire waist dress, while he, doing his best Richard Avedon, crouches above the camera, stranglehold on the lens, as skittish with this gear as the role he's been assigned. The other one, you cannot see, the unknown photographer who froze this moment and mailed it to them, unsigned, unsure if they toss it with a day's junk mail or stuff it in a shoebox somewhere, thinking they might find it decades later, yet never dreaming that this Madeline crumb might mean. Dreaming what this Madeline crumb might mean. Through the tumble of years, faces, and regrets, their dimming eyes would behold the way tomorrow once shimmered before them, dazzling as bubbles from a child's plastic wand, an apparition, they realize, that may be forgotten, but never lost. So interesting. Yeah, so I love, Mary Keaton beat me to it. She said, I love how the first stanza mimics the lens going in and out of focus. Yeah, that's really neat. The poet taking a snapshot of his pregnant wife. So great title there, because that really sets the stage. It's an interesting stage to be set. And so I like that. It answers that, gets that who, what, why, where, and when. We know where we are in the poem because the title gives us a lot. And it's not something that's, totally, been done 1,000 times. The poet taking a snapshot of his pregnant wife. There's interesting details in there. Yeah. And Tom Barlow says, I agree with these comments too. Tom Barlow says, odd choice of stanza breaks. We'll talk about that. And then the last sentence sort of loses me. And that too, I didn't feel like it got to a conclusion. But I really love the title and the opening. The poet taking a snapshot of his pregnant wife. You can see her shading her eyes, shrinking from the 35mm intrusion on her rapidly changing shape, so obvious now in the Empire waist dress, while he, doing his best. I think that's great. I really love that opening. I wouldn't change a word of that, really. Doing his best, Richard Avedon. I don't know who that is, but I'm willing to let stuff go. I could look that up. Yeah, Center Fee says, when we get to the unknown photographer, I'm confused being to guess what it means. Richard Avedon crouches above the camera, stranglehold on the lens, a skittish with his gear as the role he's been assigned. So I don't understand who Richard Avedon is. Crouches above the camera. He's a famous photographer. Okay. Okay. So doing his best, Richard Avedon crouches above the camera, stranglehold on the lens, is skittish with his gear as the role he's been assigned. The other one, you cannot see, the unknown photographer who froze this moment and mailed it to them, unsigned. Okay, so Tom Brown says it's a photographer of a fashion type. I'm just sort of losing the poem, the sense of the poem. So the other one, Jamie Thomas says, I just got that there was another photographer who took a picture of him taking a picture of his wife. Okay. Let me see. So I'm just a little confused. Like, I like the lines. I love that opening, and it had such clarity. And now I'm a little confused. So he's doing his best. That's the poet taking a snapshot of the pregnant wife. He's doing his best, Richard Avedon. That's the poet now. Crouches above the camera, a stranglehold in the lens, is skittish with his gear as the role he's been assigned. I think if the poem moved in a different direction at that point, it could be fine. But then I get lost. The other one you cannot see, the unknown photographer who froze this moment and mailed it to them unsigned. So another photographer... the title of the photo is The Other Photo. Okay. Yeah, who is the other photographer? Yeah, so the other photographer was taking a picture unknown and freezing that moment and mailing to them unsigned. So we don't even know who the poet doesn't know who the photographer is either. Unsure if they'd toss it with the day's junk mail or stuff it in a shoebox somewhere, thinking they might find it decades later, yet never dreaming that this Madeline crumb might mean. Yeah, so Leela Holmes says creep or no creeping gets scary in the middle. Let's see. Through the tumble of years, faces, and regrets, their dimming eyes would behold the way tomorrow once shimmered before them, dazzling as bubbles from a child's plastic wand, an apparition they realize may be forgotten but never lost. Yeah. So Peterson says it's called A Snapshot of My Pregnant Wife, but there's almost no description of the picture. Yeah, and so I think the poem sort of loses its sense of clarity, and I think there's a lot here that it can go on, but it jumps through it too fast. It's a little too hard to piece together, even though I understand that that's what happened. But we need more of the story in this poem. Winston Munn says if the other photographer was placed in the present tense, it would help. That's the thing, too. We're moving through time in a weird way that's just not quite working out either. And so I think maybe, to a sense of like a better way of keeping track of time for us. So like right here, the role he's been assigned, that's okay. And then meanwhile, if we had a word like that to sort of understand that it's happening at the same time, those kind of little guides would help us sort of keep track of the timeline. So meanwhile, the other one you cannot see, the unknown photographer. I guess the other problem too, this is a sentence fragment that doesn't really conclude either. The other one you cannot see, what did he do? So I think we just need this whole thing to be told in an actual story where we get to see that we didn't know someone was taking this photo of us. It's strange that it happened, that he sent it to us, and a little creepy maybe, as someone points out, but then we actually are grateful for it later, and maybe that was the point. I mean, there's so much to mine here. It's a really interesting story, and the beginning is so clear and well told that I just want the rest to be told that way and to really dig into that, what's going on in the story. It's just like a half-told story that sort of rushed through at the end, and I think telling the whole story would make it really cool. Yeah. As Ruth Kennedy says, great start, but the poem doesn't take us anywhere we can relate to. And Morgan Fee says, and who is the you that the poem addresses? It confuses me further when there's this unknown photographer. Yeah, that's a good point too. We don't have a sense of who the you is either. So we have this really like feeling lost within a great story with nice images. And so there's this sort of lost feeling and just more clarity. And this is one of those cases where the poem should be longer. Sitting up his stalker X, all these questions that we have given the story, who is this person? Even if you don't know the answer, given sort of the voice too, there's a way to address that within the poem so that we don't feel like we're confused and we're the ones that are left out. I mean, that's one of the things, it's okay to be left out of like what's going on and have things be confusing as long as the poet or the speaker of the poem is on the same page as us and also is confused and acknowledges that. And I think that's sort of what's missing too. So the idea of like who took this photo, I think within the story of the poem is a valid question that we all should be wondering, and the poet is too. And acknowledging that it's confusing, who could have done this, and addressing that would help clear up some of the stuff too. Also, there's a way that this moves to unsure if they tossed it with the day's junk mail or stuffed it in a shoebox somewhere, thing they might find it decades later. So it's like the they in here is the poet and the wife. So there's a way that the perspective shifts there too in a way that's confusing. And then we don't know, the Madeleine Crumb, as somebody mentioned, a lot of people didn't get that reference to Proust, and I think that's not really worth including in the poem. And so through the tumble of years, faces and regrets, their dimming eyes. So we have this sort of abstraction of like, it's a hypothetical world we're living in, but we really are living in the present. So why not say, like, I found this photo that was strange to me. Like, why did someone take this photo and send it to me? But I found it, 2 decades later, and it was a moment that I was really grateful for. And what does that mean? That kind of thing, to address it actually. Yeah. So anyway, so tell the whole story. And if we move to the present, let us move to the present. Let us find the thing in a shoebox if that's what happened. Yeah. Yeah, and PMB says feels like it's about unfulfilled expectations, like the photo represents unrealized ideals. And yeah, I think there's a lot of like undercurrent beneath the poem. And since the story isn't told clearly, we don't really know what to make of it or where to put it or how to feel about it. Mary Keating says, I like the way the poet breaks the lines. Yeah, the line breaks are really nice. They serve purposes. The stanza breaks, though, I think it was Mark Grenier maybe who pointed it out. The stanza breaks don't feel like they work as well as the line breaks. There's no real reason to break the stanzas there. It's not like a consistent pattern. If you were just doing it every 4 lines, that would kind of make sense to have a sort of tension between the narrative and the structure of the shape of the poem itself. Or if there was a place where the story moved and that's the stanza breaks. But instead it's sort of the random stanza lengths, but also random placements. And I don't really know what to make of that either. Mary King says it'd be great if he kept up with his first stanza and movement of a camera. Yeah, that's a good thing to point out and put it too. So, all right. So anyway, let's move on. Let's do another poem too. And I know it's getting late, but this was interesting. And let's see what else we got. It's not too long. Carrion. Again, this poet is Ken Hines from Richmond, Virginia. Carrion. The boy loves lying in this open field, blinking at the bowl of summer sky. Heedless of wire grass itching his neck, of ants sizing up his ears, he tracks the somber wings that float and swoop in primordial arcs as though suspended from puppeteer's strings. Still, as a graveyard angel, the boy believes he can draw them near. The pitch-black hunters wheel through the midday glare, shadows skimming the ground, crossing the boy's pale legs. He can almost feel the first one thump into his chest, feel the talons fishhook grip, smell the stench of outstretched wings poised as in a dream to unfold this small emptiness in the shape of a boy. Yeah, so this is interesting. So this poem has a lot of great details. Again, I'm having a little trouble... Well, maybe not. I mean, the title being Carrion, it's a really interesting title. So the boy is sort of imagining being pecked at eventually by nature. Let me read it again. and we'll look at sort of line by line. But this is, again, really great images. Contrast this with the earlier poems we saw and how much more engaged we are because of those images, how the concrete images make this sort of mental world, this magical space we can enter, and then we have thoughts and feelings about it. It's sort of one level up from thinking about the fact that we're reading a poem. Yeah. Dick Western was like the feel of this poem. Mary Keating says this from the perspective of a grave sculpture. That's interesting to me. Well, let's read it again. To me, I think he's just imagining what it would be like to have, be reclaimed by the natural world, I guess you could say. But let's read it again. Carrion. The boy loves lying in this open field. Someone pointed out that break in the first line is a little distracting. And I think so too. Because well, maybe not. I mean, is that pointing toward answering the question of what, who was it? Mary Keating was, I wonder if it was a grave sculpture. The boy loves lying, like pretending, and so there's a pun there, even though that's not what he's doing. He's really just lying in the field. But in a way, that line break tells us that that's significant, maybe. So that's an interesting use of that. So the boy loves lying in this open field, blinking in the bowl of summer sky. So great opening, blinking in the bowl of summer sky. Yeah, great way to put it. That sense of the blue being a bowl is neat. Heedless of wiregrass. Wiregrass is great detail, itching his neck. Of ants sizing up his ears. Again, I think I like the line breaks. In the last poem too, they're serving a purpose. There's a pause and an extension of ants. It's not just ants, but ants sizing up his ears. That way it modifies the image works really well. He tracks the somber wings that float and swoop in primordial arcs as though suspended from puppeteer's strings. Again, really great images. Those slow. Primordial feels like is that a word that's like good? Is that a word that's sort of an empty word even? I mean, how are the arcs primordial? I'm not sure if I believe that. It feels like a poety kind of insertion. So maybe I'd question the word choice here. It's a good poem, so we're being picky about things. But I think that might not be the right word for the arcs. Unless maybe there's a reason why primordial works, but I can't think of it. As though suspended from puppeteer strings, very nice. That sense of the arc is really nice. Still as a graveyard angel, the boy believes he can draw them near. And so here maybe it is what who was it? Mary Keating said about it actually being a statue on a tomb or a grave. Still as a graveyard angel, but I think not. I think it's interesting. The whole poem is playing with the ambiguity, which is what the boy is doing himself. He's imagining himself being Carrion. So the fact that he's sort of shifting between what I could be and what I actually am, which is the boy lying in the grass, I think that works really well. So anyway, where were we? Yeah, so the boy is still as a graveyard angel. The boy believes he can draw them near. The pitch black hunters wheel through the midday glare, shadows skimming the ground, crossing the boy's pale legs. So it's more of these imagining he's sort of letting himself go. He can almost feel the first one thump into his chest. So, and that's the actual vultures coming and feeding on him. Wheel through the midday glare, shadows skimming the ground, crossing the boy's pale legs. You can almost feel the first one thump onto his chest, feel the talons, fishhook grip, smell the stench of outstretched wings, poised as in a dream to enfold this small emptiness in the shape of a boy. Yeah, it's really nice. As PMB says, a great point. This poem can work as a single sentence with some small adjustments. And I might go for that, too. I think that's a great suggestion, Paul. Because it does have this sort of one sort of breath aspect to it. It's sort of one thought, in a way, that works really well. Yeah, Dick Western's time, I love the attention to sound. It's like the poet's discovering the poem by listening to it. Yeah, exactly. Morgan Feeney says the lines that end in commas make me doubt the lines that don't, if that makes sense. Yeah. So to me, I think I'd play a little bit with, I like Paul Mitchell Bernstein's suggestion of making it all in one sentence. I think it's a good idea. And I think primordial is the wrong word. Otherwise, I think it's just a good poem. I like it. Yeah. Yeah, so a few tweaks, and I think this one's good to go. So thanks for sharing that. Really good poem, and nice to see you. You just never know what you're going to get going through submissions. Thanks for sharing that with Ken Hines once again with Carrion. I also looked at his The Poet Taking a Snapshot of His Pregnant Wife, which is unfinished, but I'd love to see the finished version someday. So good work there at the end. Thanks for sharing that, Ken. And that's going to wrap it up. We went 22 minutes over, but that's all right. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's going to wrap up the show for today. Thanks everybody it's been a lot of fun. Good poem. Again, too, yeah, Deb T with that last poem says, good title too. And again, if you feel differently about the title at the end than you do at the beginning the first time you read it, that's a sign that it's a good poem, that it went somewhere. So it's a good little heuristic test. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that. Really fun critique. Thanks everybody. If you like this, of course, click the like button if you haven't yet. No matter where you're watching this, always helps. And that is going to wrap up the show. So, this week's guest in the Rattled House coming up is going to be Julie Cain. And Julie Cain, a wonderful formalist poet, really well known for both her villanelles and her sonnets. She's been in Best American Poetry. She's won the Donald Justice Prize. Her book, I'm just looking at my pile of books here. Rhythm and Booze was picked by Maxine Cumin for the National Poetry Series. I mean, just a wonderful poet. I think he got like 12 books or something like that. And they're all great. They're all very musically inclined. Really fun poet to be talking about and with. Her most recent is Mothers of Ireland. We're going to look at poems from 3 of her books during the program and talk poetry. It's going to be a lot of fun with Julie Cain. The prompt for this week was to find a partner and write at least one and write a collaborative poem. So that'll be a lot of fun too, and if you're someone who tends to be isolated loner type poet, which I am myself too, it's fun to break out of your shell and work with somebody. And so do that. If you don't have somebody you think of to work with, go to our prompt group on Facebook, Rattlecast Prompt Lines on Facebook, and find that and ask somebody to work with you. And I still got a few days to do that. Gonna be a lot of fun. That was the prompt for this week. Also should mention, we just released the Poetry Space, or Katie Dozier did, I should say. To find the Poetry Space, just go to the Poetry Space on iTunes or Spotify or whatever. And we talked to A.M. Jester this time about imitation, which is a really fun topic in poetry. He has a book called The Billy Collins Experience, where the entire book is imitating Billy Collins. We talk about that and some other imitations too. So that just dropped because it's a Friday. So check out that if you're looking for something to read or listen to while you're going for a walk or riding your bike or whatever later in the day. Hope you have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you on Sunday. See you later. Goodbye.